Dr. Maya Thompson stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her Atlanta home, adjusting her navy blue blazer one final time. At 42, she carried herself with the confidence that came from years of proving herself in operating rooms and medical conferences. Her natural hair was styled in a neat professional bun, and her dark skin glowed with the early morning light streaming through the window. The clock on her phone showed 5:30 a.m. Her flight to San Francisco wasn't until 9:45 a.m., but Maya lived by a simple rule. Being extra prepared was better than being sorry. This philosophy had served her well throughout her career, from medical school to becoming one of the youngest heads of neurosurgery at Emory University Hospital. "Mom, you're going to be late for your conference," called out her teenage daughter Jasmine from downstairs. Maya smiled, picking up her carry-on suitcase. Jasmine had inherited her mother's tendency to worry about time. The kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee when Maya walked in. Her daughter had already prepared her travel mug. Black coffee with just a touch of honey, exactly how she liked it. Jasmine stood there in her pajamas, her kinky curls wild from sleep, but insisted on seeing her mother off. "You know I'm actually 3 hours early, right?" Maya said, hugging her daughter. "Aunt Patricia will be here in an hour to stay with you until I'm back on Friday." "I know, Mom, but you always say being early is being on time, and being on time is being late." Jasmine mimicked her mother's voice, making them both laugh. The Uber driver was already waiting outside their house in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Maya had ordered it the night before, another habit that showed her careful planning. The driver, an elderly man named Robert, helped her with her luggage while making small talk about the weather. During the drive to Atlanta International Airport, Maya reviewed her presentation on her tablet. The medical conference in San Francisco was important. She would be sharing her groundbreaking research on minimally invasive brain surgery techniques. Her work had already saved countless lives and reduced recovery time significantly for patients. The morning traffic was light, and they reached the airport by 6:15 a.m. Maya tipped Robert generously and made her way inside the familiar terminal. She'd been through these halls countless times over the years, earning her Diamond Elite status through numerous medical conferences and speaking engagements across the country. At the check-in counter, the airline staff member, Sarah, greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Dr. Thompson. Flying to San Francisco today." Maya nodded, pleased to be recognized. Over the years, she'd become a familiar face to many of the airport staff. "Yes, the annual Neurosurgical Innovation Conference. Your usual seat in first class is confirmed," Sarah said, printing out her boarding pass. "And of course, you have access to the first-class lounge. Have a wonderful flight." Maya thanked her and moved through security with practiced ease. She had her routine down to a science. Laptop out, shoes off, liquids in a clear bag. The TSA agents worked efficiently, and within minutes, she was through the checkpoint, slipping her feet back into her comfortable yet professional black heels. Looking at her watch, Maya saw it was only 6:45 a.m. She had plenty of time to work on her presentation in the comfort of the first-class lounge. As she walked through the terminal, she sent a quick text to Jasmine, letting her know she'd cleared security. The morning sun streamed through the large airport windows, creating patterns on the polished floor. Maya walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the tiles, carrying her success with quiet dignity. Other travelers hurried past, some running to catch flights, others moving slowly with coffee cups in hand. When she reached the entrance to the first-class lounge, Maya pulled out her credentials, her Diamond Elite card, first-class boarding pass, and ID. She'd done this hundreds of times before, and it was usually a smooth process. The lounge was her sanctuary before flights, a quiet place where she could prepare for her presentations or catch up on medical journals. As she approached the desk, Maya noticed something different in the attendant's expression. It wasn't the usual welcoming smile she was accustomed to, but rather a look of skepticism that made her pause mid-step. Little did she know, this routine business trip was about to become anything but ordinary. The blonde-haired desk attendant, whose name tag read Karen, looked up from her computer screen with narrowed eyes. Her gaze moved slowly from Maya's face to her credentials, then back again, as if trying to solve a complicated puzzle. "May I help you?" Karen's tone carried a hint of suspicion that Maya had heard too many times before in her life. "Good morning," Maya replied professionally, sliding her Diamond Elite card and first-class boarding pass across the counter. "I'm here to use the lounge before my flight." Karen picked up the credentials with 2 fingers, examining them as if they might be counterfeit. "Are you sure you're in the right place? The general waiting area is down the hall." Maya took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. After 20 years in medicine, she developed a thick skin, but moments like these still stung. "Yes, I'm quite sure. As you can see from my credentials, I'm a Diamond Elite member with full lounge access." A well-dressed businessman walked up to the desk next to them, and Karen immediately brightened. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the first-class lounge." She barely glanced at his credentials before waving him through with a warm smile. Maya noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd spent years noticing these subtle differences in treatment. The businessman, catching the exchange, had the decency to look uncomfortable as he hurried past. "I'll need to verify these," Karen announced, picking up the phone. Her eyes never left Maya, as if expecting her to suddenly make a run for it. Other travelers in the lounge entrance area were beginning to take notice of the situation. Some pretended not to watch, while others openly stared. Maya stood straight, her years of operating under pressure serving her well in this moment. A few minutes later, a man in a crisp suit approached from inside the lounge. His badge identified him as Richard Brooks, senior lounge manager. His expression was a mixture of condescension and forced politeness. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Karen rather than Maya. "This woman is trying to enter the lounge," Karen explained, emphasizing the word woman in a way that made it clear she meant something else entirely. Richard turned to Maya, speaking slowly and loudly as if she might have trouble understanding English. "Ma'am, this is an exclusive lounge for our first-class passengers and elite members. Perhaps you've gotten confused about." "I'm neither confused nor lost," Maya interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Dr. Maya Thompson, Diamond Elite member for the past 5 years, and I'm booked in first class to San Francisco." Richard's face tightened. "Well, you understand we have to maintain certain standards." His eyes moved dismissively over her expensive suit and designer briefcase. "Our regular members might be more comfortable if you waited in the main terminal." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Maya could hear whispers and see phones being pulled out. She knew what this was really about, and clearly, so did everyone else watching. "Are you suggesting," Maya began, her voice carrying the same precise tone she used when instructing medical residents, "that I should wait elsewhere despite my valid credentials because some of your regular members might be uncomfortable with my presence?" A woman in the growing crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "This is ridiculous." Another person was definitely recording the interaction on their phone. Richard shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. "Now, there's no need to make this about, well, you know. We're simply trying to ensure all our guests have a pleasant experience." Maya reached for her phone, her movements deliberate and calm. Years of performing delicate brain surgeries had given her hands an unshakable steadiness. She could feel her heart racing, but outwardly, she remained composed. "Let me help you understand exactly who you're attempting to remove from your lounge," she said, her voice clear enough to carry to the growing audience. As she pulled up her professional profile, she knew this moment was about more than just accessing the airport lounge. It was about every time she'd been underestimated, every doubt she'd faced, and every barrier she'd broken through to reach where she was today. The air in the lounge entrance grew thick with tension as Maya prepared to reveal exactly who she was, not just to Richard and Karen, but to everyone watching. The next few moments would prove to be a turning point that none of them expected. Maya held her phone steady as she opened her professional profile. The screen displayed a photograph of her in surgical scrubs, standing in front of the Emory University Hospital logo. Her list of achievements scrolled beneath the image like a silent testament to years of dedication. "Perhaps," Maya began, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room, "you should take a closer look at who you're trying to remove from your lounge." She turned the phone toward Richard and Karen. "I'm Dr. Maya Thompson, head of neurosurgery at Emory University Hospital. I hold 7 medical patents for surgical techniques that have saved thousands of lives. Last month, I was featured in Medical Innovation Quarterly as one of the top neurosurgeons in the country." The crowd that had gathered grew quieter, hanging on every word. Someone whispered, "Oh, snap." Another person was typing furiously on their phone, likely sharing the unfolding drama on social media. Richard's face had begun to pale, but he attempted to maintain his authority. "Dr. Thompson, I'm sure you understand that we have protocols." "Oh, I understand protocols very well," Maya interrupted, her voice taking on the edge she typically reserved for medical students who weren't taking their responsibilities seriously enough. "In fact, I write protocols that guide other surgeons through complex brain operations. What I don't understand is why my valid credentials were questioned when others walked right through." Karen, the desk attendant, had shrunk back slightly in her chair, her earlier confidence evaporating. A few feet away, the businessman who had been waved through earlier was now recording the interaction on his phone, shaking his head in disgust at the treatment he was witnessing. "The protocols you mention," Maya continued, her words precise and measured, "didn't seem to apply to other guests. I've been watching for the past 10 minutes as you welcomed several other travelers without so much as a second glance at their credentials." An older woman in the crowd spoke up. "I've been watching too. She's right, they didn't check anyone else like this." Richard's face had shifted from pale to slightly red. He glanced nervously at the growing number of phones recording the incident. "Dr. Thompson, if there's been any misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding here," Maya cut in, "is your assumption that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly belong in your first-class lounge. Would you like to explain that assumption to my 100,000 social media followers, or perhaps to the medical board where I serve as a senior advisor?" The mention of her social media following caused Richard to swallow hard. More phones had appeared in the crowd, and the whispers had grown louder. Someone in the back called out, "Tell them, doctor." Maya took a step closer to the desk, her presence commanding despite her average height. "I perform brain surgery on senators, CEOs, and yes, even airline executives. I've saved lives regardless of the patient's race, gender, or status. And yet, here I stand, being told I might be more comfortable elsewhere." A young black woman in the crowd had tears in her eyes, watching Maya stand her ground. An elderly white couple near the front were shaking their heads in embarrassment at the situation. "Dr. Thompson," Richard tried again, his voice notably less confident. "Please allow me to." "To what?" Maya asked, her tone remaining professional but firm. "To apologize now that you know my credentials. To backtrack because you've realized I'm not who you assumed I was. The issue isn't that you failed to recognize me. The issue is that you and your staff felt entitled to humiliate any person of color who dared to enter your precious lounge." The crowd had grown larger, with several airline staff members hovering at the edges, looking concerned. The clicking of phones and murmurs of support created a backdrop to the confrontation. Just as Richard opened his mouth to respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Thompson, is that really you?" Maya turned to see a familiar face approaching from the direction of the terminal. The crowd parted as a well-dressed man in his 60s walked toward them, his airline executive pin gleaming on his lapel. She recognized him immediately from last month's medical conference in Boston, where she had been the keynote speaker. The expression on Richard's face shifted from embarrassment to terror as he recognized his superior walking toward them. The situation was about to take yet another unexpected turn. "Dr. Thompson, what an unexpected pleasure." The airline executive, James Wilson, strode forward with his hand extended. "Your keynote speech at the Medical Innovation Summit last month was brilliant. I still can't stop thinking about your breakthrough in pediatric brain surgery techniques." The atmosphere in the lounge entrance shifted dramatically. Richard, the lounge manager, seemed to shrink several inches, while Karen at the desk suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. "Mr. Wilson," Maya responded warmly, shaking his hand. "It's good to see you again, though I must say, the welcome at your lounge has been less than innovative." James Wilson's smile faded as he looked around at the crowd, the recording phones, and his visibly uncomfortable staff. What exactly is happening here? Before Richard could jump in with excuses, a voice from the crowd called out, "They were trying to kick her out." Another added, "They wouldn't believe her credentials were real." Wilson's face darkened as he turned to his employees. "Is this true?" Richard stammered, "Sir, we were simply following protocols." "Were you following protocols when you waved through 6 other first-class passengers without checking their credentials?" Maya asked calmly. "I counted." Several people in the crowd nodded in confirmation. The young black woman who had been crying earlier spoke up. I watched them do it. They only stalked her. Wilson turned to Maya, genuine embarrassment on his face. Dr. Thompson, I can't begin to express my dismay. Last month, you were teaching our company's medical team about your revolutionary surgical methods, and today, Maya continued for him, her voice steady, I'm being reminded that even with all my achievements, some people still see only one thing when they look at me. The crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. Many were still recording, and Maya knew this incident would likely go viral. But this wasn't about creating a scandal, it was about creating change. Mr. Wilson, she continued, just last month in Boston, we discussed how medical innovations can save lives regardless of who the patient is. But innovations in medicine mean little if we don't also innovate in how we treat each other as human beings. Wilson nodded gravely. You're absolutely right. He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of his position. What happened here today is completely unacceptable and against everything our airline stands for. He then faced Richard and Karen directly. Both of you, in my office, immediately after your shifts. His tone left no room for argument. Maya watched as realization dawned on their faces. They had just discriminated against someone who not only had every right to be there, but who was also personally known to their CEO for saving lives, including those of children. A slow clap started somewhere in the crowd, quickly spreading until the entire lounge entrance was filled with applause. Maya raised her hand to quiet them. Thank you, she said, addressing everyone, but applause isn't what we need right now. What we need is reflection and change. Every person standing here today has witnessed something that happens far too often, usually without cameras present, without CEOs stepping in, and without the protection of prestigious titles. She turned back to Wilson. I would be happy to help develop a proper training program for your staff. Not because of what happened to me today, but because of what might happen to the next person who walks through those doors. Wilson didn't hesitate. Done. We would be honored to have your input, Dr. Thompson. The crowd began to disperse, but not before many people approached Maya to express their support and admiration. Several shared their own similar experiences, while others apologized for not speaking up sooner. As the situation calmed down, a young girl, maybe 12 years old, approached Maya with her mother's encouragement. Dr. Thompson, she said shyly, I recorded everything because I want to be like you when I grow up. Not just the doctor part, but the brave part. Maya knelt down to the girl's level, emotion finally cracking through her professional exterior. What's your name, sweetheart? Destiny, the girl replied. Well, Destiny, Maya said softly, sometimes being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. Remember that. As Maya finally entered the lounge, now escorted personally by Wilson, she knew that this incident would have repercussions far beyond this one airport, this one airline, or this one day. Sometimes, change started with a single moment of standing your ground. Inside the first-class lounge, Maya sat at a quiet corner table, her laptop open but untouched. The events of the past hour had drawn more attention than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications as the videos of the incident spread across social media platforms. Dr. Thompson, a flight attendant approached her table with a fresh cup of coffee. This is from the crew. We just wanted to say we're all so sorry about what happened. Maya thanked her with a gentle smile. Around the lounge, other passengers were trying to be subtle about watching her, but she could feel their eyes. Some were typing on their phones, likely sharing their eyewitness accounts of the confrontation. A group of business travelers at a nearby table were discussing the incident in hushed tones. Did you see how calm she stayed? One whispered. I would have lost it. That's because she's probably had to deal with this her entire career, another replied. My wife's a doctor too, and the stories she tells me. Maya's phone rang. It was Jasmine. She answered quickly, Hey, sweetie. Mom, you're trending on Twitter. Jasmine's voice was excited. Aunt Patricia and I are watching the videos. You're amazing. People are calling you hashtag #firstclassdoc and hashtag dignity and self-discrimination. Before Maya could respond, a woman approached her table. She was wearing a hijab and had tears in her eyes. Dr. Thompson, may I sit for a moment? Maya gestured to the empty chair across from her. Of course. My name is Dr. Fatima Rahman, the woman said. I'm a cardiologist from Chicago, and I just wanted to thank you. Last month, I was denied entry to a medical conference because they didn't believe I was really a doctor. I wish I had handled it with your grace. More people began gathering around Maya's table, each with their own story to share. A Latino executive talked about being questioned in business class. An elderly Indian man described similar experiences at airport lounges across the country. The young girl, Destiny, who had spoken to Maya earlier, sat cross-legged on the floor near her chair, taking notes in a small notebook. Her mother explained that she wanted to document everything for a school project about standing up to discrimination. James Wilson returned to the lounge, now accompanied by several other airline executives who had seen the videos and rushed to the airport. They huddled with Maya, discussing immediate changes to their training protocols. We'd like to start by having you review our current diversity training materials, one executive suggested. Clearly, they're inadequate. Maya nodded, pulling out her tablet. I have some suggestions. First, your staff needs to understand that discrimination isn't always obvious. It can be subtle, a different tone of voice, an extra level of scrutiny, an assumption of not belonging. As she spoke, more phones appeared, recording her impromptu lesson on institutional bias and professional dignity. The crowd in the lounge had grown so large that people were standing against the walls. A news crew had arrived outside the lounge, trying to get in for an interview. Wilson's security team kept them at bay, protecting Maya's privacy. Dr. Thompson called out a young black businessman from the back of the crowd. I have a daughter who wants to be a doctor. Would you mind if I took a picture with you to show her that it's possible? Maya agreed, and suddenly a line formed of people wanting photos with her. Parents with children, young professionals, elderly travelers, all wanting to capture a moment with the woman who had turned discrimination into a teaching opportunity. Jasmine called again. Mom, CNN is talking about you. And guess what? Your medical conference in San Francisco just called. They want you to give an additional speech about today. Maya looked around the lounge at all the faces watching her with admiration and respect. The same lounge that had tried to turn her away was now filled with people drawn to her strength and dignity. A flight attendant rushed up to her. Dr. Thompson, we've upgraded your seat to our premium first-class suite, and the pilots would be honored if you visit the cockpit before takeoff. Maya smiled, thinking about how this day had transformed from a routine business trip into something much more significant. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the hospital board congratulating her on handling the situation with such grace. As she prepared to board her flight, Maya realized that sometimes the most important surgeries weren't the ones performed in an operating room, but the ones that helped heal society's deeper wounds. As Maya prepared to board her flight to San Francisco, the impact of the morning's events continued to ripple through the airport. The videos had gone viral, reaching millions of views within hours. News outlets were calling it a watershed moment in the ongoing conversation about discrimination in professional spaces. James Wilson walked with Maya to the gate, personally escorting her while sharing his own revelation. You know, Dr. Thompson, I've always prided myself on running an inclusive airline. But today showed me how much work we still have to do. They passed by several gates where passengers recognized Maya from the viral videos. People stood and applauded, some holding up their phones with messages of support displayed on their screens. A group of young medical students, who happened to be at the airport, approached her with tears in their eyes. Dr. Thompson, one of them said, her voice shaking, we watched your videos. We're first-year medical students, and seeing you stand up like that, it gave us hope. The young students, a diverse group of future doctors, gathered around Maya. She looked at their eager faces and saw reflections of her younger self, full of dreams but aware of the obstacles ahead. Remember, Maya told them, the credentials aren't just pieces of paper. They're proof of your dedication, your intelligence, and your right to be wherever your talents take you. As they continued toward the gate, a familiar face appeared. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the keynote speakers scheduled for the San Francisco conference. She had been on a layover when she saw the videos. Maya, Dr. Chen called out, rushing over. The conference committee just held an emergency virtual meeting. We want to adjust tomorrow's schedule to include a panel discussion about what happened here. Would you lead it? Before Maya could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Actually, this needs to go beyond one panel discussion. It was Marcus Rivera, CEO of a major medical equipment company, who had been in the lounge during the incident. Dr. Thompson, Rivera continued, your handling of this situation was masterful. My company would like to sponsor a nationwide series of workshops on professional dignity and inclusion. We want you to head the initiative. The gate area had become crowded with people wanting to be part of this moment. Airline staff who had witnessed the lounge incident were now passing out water bottles to the growing crowd, many of them taking pictures and videos. A group of flight attendants approached Maya with a handmade card they had quickly put together. Inside, dozens of airline employees had written messages of support and appreciation. One message particularly caught her eye. Thank you for showing us how to change hearts with dignity instead of anger. James Wilson, who had been on his phone, turned to Maya with excitement. Dr. Thompson, our board just had an emergency meeting. We want to establish a permanent diversity advisory council, and we'd like you to chair it. Your experience and approach to handling discrimination would be invaluable. Maya looked around at all the people gathered, the medical students, the airline staff, the business leaders, and ordinary travelers. What had started as an attempt to exclude her had transformed into an opportunity to create lasting change. An elderly gentleman made his way through the crowd. He walked with a cane and wore a cap identifying him as a civil rights movement veteran. Young lady, he said, his voice carrying years of wisdom, I marched in Selma. What you did today, keeping your dignity while demanding respect, that's how we make real change. The boarding call for Maya's flight began to sound through the terminal. As she prepared to board, Wilson made one final announcement to the gathered crowd. Starting today, he declared, our airline is implementing the zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Dr. Thompson has shown us that excellence knows no color and dignity has no dress code. The gate area erupted in applause. Maya noticed Richard and Karen, the lounge staff from earlier, watching from a distance. Their faces showed a mix of shame and understanding, perhaps the first steps toward real change. As Maya walked down the jet bridge, she checked her phone one last time. Jasmine had sent a message. Mom, you're not just trending anymore. You're making history. My teacher is using the videos in class tomorrow to discuss peaceful resistance and professional integrity. Maya smiled, knowing that what had started as a confrontation in an airport lounge had become something much more significant, a catalyst for change, a moment of teaching, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is unwavering dignity. The plane awaited her, and San Francisco was calling, but now with a purpose far greater than her original conference plans. Maya's flight to San Francisco was unlike any she had experienced in her years of business travel. The first-class cabin crew treated her with a level of respect that went beyond their usual professional courtesy. There was a sense of admiration in their interactions. During the flight, the captain made an unusual announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to it. Passengers throughout the plane applauded. A woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered, my daughter works in corporate training. She just texted me that your video is already being incorporated into their workplace sensitivity programs. Mid-flight, Maya opened her laptop to revise her conference presentation. Her original speech had been about surgical innovations, but now she had a different kind of healing to discuss. She began crafting a new introduction about breaking barriers and creating inclusive spaces in professional environments. Her phone, now in airplane mode, still displayed the thousands of notifications that had accumulated. The hashtag #DignitiLikeThompson was trending nationwide. Major news networks were requesting interviews, and medical associations were calling for her to speak at their events. But what touched Maya most was an email from a young black girl in Michigan who wanted to become a doctor. Dear Dr. Thompson, it read, today you showed me that I don't have to choose between standing up for myself and staying professional. You can do both. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, the flight attendant approached with a stack of notes. Dr. Thompson, several passengers wrote these during the flight. They wanted to share their own stories with you. Maya read through them carefully. There were stories from professionals of all backgrounds, lawyers, executives, teachers, engineers, each describing similar experiences of being questioned, doubted, or dismissed because of their appearance. Upon landing, Maya was surprised to find a welcoming committee at the gate. The airline's San Francisco management team was there, along with representatives from several medical organizations. They carried a banner that read, "Thank you for teaching us all." Dr. Patricia Chen, the conference organizer, stepped forward. "Maya, we've reorganized tomorrow's schedule. Instead of just a panel, we're dedicating the entire morning session to discussing inclusive practices in medicine. Several hospital administrators in attendance want to implement immediate changes in their institutions." The airport terminal had become a spontaneous gathering place. People who had seen the viral videos came to show support. A group of young professionals held signs reading "Dignity in the face of discrimination" and "Respect is not a privilege." But what happened next truly surprised Maya. Richard and Karen, the lounge staff from JFK, appeared on the airport's video screens. They were conducting a live, public apology broadcast across all airline terminals. "What happened this morning was inexcusable," Richard said, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "Dr. Thompson showed us that true professionalism isn't about excluding people, it's about recognizing and respecting the dignity of every person." Karen added, "We've asked to be part of the airline's new training program. We want to share our story as an example of how unconscious bias can blind us to the humanity of others." The airline's CEO then announced a series of immediate changes: mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, a review of all access policies, and the establishment of a Diversity and Inclusion Council with Maya as its honorary first chair. As Maya walked through the terminal toward her hotel transport, she was stopped by an elderly Chinese woman who grabbed her hand. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "Today you fought for all of us." A young Latino man in a business suit approached next. "Dr. Thompson, I'm an executive at a tech company. We'd like to partner with your hospital to create opportunities for underrepresented medical students." By the time Maya reached her hotel, the story had evolved from a single incident into a movement. Her phone showed messages from medical schools requesting her help in reviewing their admission policies, corporations asking for guidance on inclusive workplace practices, and even a publisher interested in having her write a book about professional dignity. That evening, as Maya prepared for the conference, she received one final message, a video from her daughter Jasmine. It showed Jasmine's entire class standing together, holding a sign that read, "Be brave, be professional, be like Dr. Thompson." Maya smiled, knowing that what had started as discrimination had transformed into education, and what began as exclusion had become an opportunity for lasting change. Tomorrow's conference would be about more than medical innovations. It would be about innovating the way society treats all its members. 1 year had passed since the incident at JFK's first-class lounge, and Maya Thompson sat in her office at Emory University Hospital, looking at the framed tweet that had started it all. The viral video had garnered over 50 million views, but its impact went far beyond social media statistics. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Jasmine. "Mom, guess what? Your story is now part of our school's social studies curriculum." Attached was a photo of a textbook page featuring the airport incident as a case study in modern civil rights and professional advocacy. The changes that had sprouted from that day were substantial and far-reaching. The airline had completely overhauled its training programs, with Richard and Karen, surprisingly, becoming key speakers in their corporate sensitivity workshops. They shared their story as a powerful example of how bias can be recognized and overcome. A knock on her office door interrupted Maya's reflection. It was Dr. Sarah Chen, who had witnessed the incident in San Francisco. "Ready for the video conference? The medical students are waiting." Maya nodded and turned to her computer, where hundreds of medical students from across the country had gathered virtually for her monthly Dignity in Medicine seminar. These sessions had become so popular that medical schools had made them part of their regular curriculum. "Good morning, future doctors," Maya began, noticing familiar faces from previous sessions. "Today marks 1 year since an attempt to exclude became a catalyst for inclusion." As she spoke, Maya thought about all that had changed. The airline's Diversity Advisory Council, which she now chaired, had become a model for other corporations. Their guidelines had been adopted by hotels, restaurants, and businesses nationwide. The young girl Destiny, who had watched the incident unfold, was now a high school senior preparing for pre-med studies. She had started a successful youth program called Future Doctors for Dignity, with chapters in schools across the country. Maya's phone lit up with another message, this time from the White House. She had been selected to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to civil rights and professional equality. The ceremony would be next month. The medical conference in San Francisco, which had seemed so important that day, had evolved into an annual Innovation in Inclusion Summit, bringing together leaders from medicine, business, and education to discuss creating more equitable professional spaces. During the video conference, a student raised her hand. "Dr. Thompson, how do you feel about Richard and Karen now?" Maya smiled, remembering her last interaction with them. They had both become dedicated advocates for change, traveling to speak at conferences about their journey from bias to understanding. "They remind us," Maya responded, "that change is possible when we're willing to learn from our mistakes." The incident had also transformed Maya's own career. While she still performed surgeries, she now dedicated significant time to mentoring young professionals and consulting with organizations on inclusive practices. Her daughter Jasmine had started a popular blog called Dignity's Daughter, sharing stories of young people standing up against discrimination. After the video conference, Maya walked through the hospital halls, noticing the diverse faces of medical professionals going about their work. The hospital had implemented many changes, including a new policy requiring all staff to undergo dignity and inclusion training. That evening, as Maya prepared to leave her office, she received one final surprise. A letter had arrived from a first-class lounge attendant at JFK. "Dear Dr. Thompson," it read, "today I stopped someone from making the same mistake we made a year ago. Your story taught me to see credentials, not assumptions." Maya placed the letter in a special folder where she kept similar messages, hundreds of them from people who had been inspired to either stand up for themselves or stand up for others. As she drove home, Maya reflected on how a moment of discrimination had sparked a movement of dignity. The changes weren't perfect, and there was still work to be done, but the conversation had shifted. Professional spaces were becoming more inclusive, one policy, one person, one moment at a time. That night, as Maya helped Jasmine with her college applications, she noticed her daughter had chosen to write her essay about that day at the airport. The title read, "How My Mom Turned a First-Class Lounge into a Classroom for America." The story had indeed become more than just a viral moment. It had become a lesson in how dignity, professionalism, and courage could transform not just one space, but an entire society's understanding of respect and inclusion.